the webinar. For today, just a little housekeeping items before we get started. We're going to go for about 1 hour. We will leave time for question and answer, which you can submit either in the chat or on the Q&A side as well. By now, most people are familiar with Zoom and how to navigate the chat and the Q&A. This is eligible for one CEU. It was indicated in the registration for all the myriad of licenses and certifications. If you have a question, feel free to email and I will respond to you over the next day or two. So glad you could be here today. We have a webinar today that will cover emerging trends, the growth of gaming, sports betting, and internet gambling. And we highlight these three in particular because of what we've seen specific to the state of New Jersey. You know, all of us on this webinar, well, I should say most of us, because we do have my friend Dan Smith out in St. Louis, Missouri. Welcome back, Dan. And, you know, most of us then are living, working, or playing in the state of New Jersey. So what happens in our state becomes very timely and relevant. And so we need to understand how it's impacting the residents, those who work here, those who live here, those who play here. But other professionals from around the country can also understand how it may happen in their state as well. So I think it's important that we highlight some areas of concern, some areas of growth that we've seen around the state, and what it means for the problem gambler, for the loved ones of the problem gambler, and where we can find resources and help. So for the next hour, 55 minutes or so, we're going to take a look at these trends as we see them really taking off. And COVID, in a way, as we just reached the 1-year anniversary, has fueled, I suppose, a quickening of certain elements of gambling and treatment. One area that's really been developed quickly is the concept of telehealth and teletherapy services. It is likely something we would have seen as we were moving towards it over time, but when COVID hit and a number of treatment providers needed to refigure and reconfigure their services because inpatient clinical work was not being done, telehealth and teletherapy stepped up, and that was a way to continue giving people the support and the resources that they needed. So we have seen some positives during this pandemic in terms of fueling technology and the use of resources. And there's some more resources a little bit later on that we'll go through to help people who might be struggling or the loved ones who might have a family member who's struggling. So let's talk about the schedule for the day. We're just going to take a quick overview and landscape as we've done, a little background, a little housekeeping. Again, using the chat and the Q&A, I will go through chat a bit later on. Happy to answer any questions you might have that I don't address on the webinar. Whenever I attend a webinar, I always try to listen for something new or something different or something that makes me say, aha, right? It's those little nuggets that we can take away and apply either personally or professionally. And we also become ambassadors. As the late Kevin Gregan from Genesis Counseling Services says, we become ambassadors when we hear a message. And now our job is to take this message and take it out into the community. You know, have a conversation with someone that you love or you care about. Talk to a neighbor, talk to a friend. You know, March is Problem Gambling Awareness Month, and we want people to have a conversation, right? Take action. Right? Gain awareness, all of these components. So I'm glad that you're on here today and that we can spend the next period of time together. We'll talk about the progression from fantasy sports contests to real sports betting. You know, fantasy sports contest in the state of New Jersey is technically not considered gambling under the statute. However, as our office manager, Alice, who is also on this webinar today, has said in the past, and it really makes sense, sometimes we got to throw the technicalities out the window. Right? Behaviorally, it looks and feels like gambling. So we have to treat it as such. And we know people call our helpline who struggle with addiction to fantasy sports contests. We have people that call up for addiction to many different types of things that may not legally be considered gambling. However, it's creating harm in their life. So anything that creates harm, we need to address it because it doesn't matter what the regulations say. If it looks like a duck and walks like a duck, then let's call it a duck and let's treat it like a duck. But first, let's take a look at the brain. What's happening inside our brain? Very simply, when we talk about gambling, we have to talk about dopamine. And we have to understand that The last part of our brain that develops in our human anatomy is the prefrontal cortex. It's that part right at the front right here that guides our decision making process. And so that typically will finish development somewhere in the mid to late 20s, assuming no other areas of issue or developmental delay. We'll figure mid to late 20s. But it's that decision making piece that gets impacted. And so when we talk about gambling opportunities, we talk about the legal age of gambling being 18 for, say, lottery, 21 for casino and sports betting. We have younger people who still have a developing brain that are getting bombarded by messaging, whether on social media, whether through traditional forms like the television, the radio, whatever it might be. They're getting inundated with all of this mixed messaging, and they're hanging out with their friends and they're hearing ads and all this, deposit $1, win $100 if somebody throws a strike in a baseball game. Well, of course that's going to happen. That's a gimme. So, what does it all mean? Well, in every one of these situations, there's always a little bit of dopamine that's produced. Because when we talk about gambling addiction, it's not about the money. It's about the action. It's about action or escape. That's what gambling's all about. Gambling is not a money disease. It's not a money problem. It's an emotional problem. People escape the world because they don't know how to deal with it. So they turn to drugs, they turn to alcohol, they turn to gambling, right? Many things, right? It masks the pain that someone is going through. But what's tricky about gambling is that in our brain, we produce lots of dopamine. And when we're expecting a win, when we have that risk, that uncertainty, that, oh my goodness, this can be the thing that totally changes my life, and it's so exciting, that generates dopamine. We see it not just in gambling, you see it, I guess, even in social media. When someone comments on a picture, when someone likes something, right? You get a like, you get a comment. Oh, that makes me feel good. It's called the digital dopamine drip, the digital dopamine drip. And we see it all throughout society. And gambling is a place we see it as well. But it's very powerful. It's a powerful drug that lives in our body. And our brain, when we're expecting a win or a gain, our brain lights up as shown on the right side. When we're expecting a win, the dopamine flows. So we have to understand physiologically at a very simplistic level what's happening. But we also have to understand that gambling is a hidden addiction. We can't see it. We can't smell it. You can't look at someone and say, yes, they have a bad gambling addiction. Oftentimes it's hidden. It's difficult to diagnose, especially if we're not asking questions. For clinicians on the webinar today, are you asking questions of your clients about their gambling habits? Oftentimes, if you're a drug and alcohol counselor and you have a client that comes to you, sometimes you can almost assume, which we should never do, but I think sometimes with the volume of work that we have to do on a daily basis, we assume, okay, you're here for this reason, let's get into this treatment plan and let's start talking about these steps. But are we also asking, hey, by the way, talk to me about your gambling. Do you gamble? What do you gamble on? When was the last time you placed a bet? There's a few questions you should be asking just so we can get a whole well-rounded picture of the individual that's sitting before you. Gambling can be the addiction switch, right? A person in recovery from substance can easily switch addictions, or it can be the drug of choice, the new drug of choice that sends them back to their original drug of choice. So we have to address the whole person, right? Person-centered approach, and we have to understand all the elements of the individual. What makes gambling so difficult to give up is the intermittent reward schedule. It's hard to abandon an intermittent reward schedule because a gambler has been conditioned to know that every so often they will win something. The problem is threefold. They don't know how much they will win, they don't know how often they will win it, and they don't know when that will next occur. So they don't know how much, how often, or when it will happen again. They just know that every so often there's going to be a dopamine boost and it's going to feel really good. And that's what can perpetuate and just keep the addiction moving forward. Reasons for gambling? Well, we talked about people gamble for action or escape day-to-day problems. If there's a problem or a situation in someone's life that they don't know how to deal with, maybe they don't have the right life skills. Maybe they were never taught. They don't have certain coping skills. They don't have the right tools in their tool belt. So it's easy to escape those issues. And it's easy to, let me just gamble for an hour or two and come back to this issue later on. Unfortunately, what we know is that the problem doesn't go away. And oftentimes the problem might seem to be bigger. Now, it's funny because I always think about this problem like as a person, a giant in my life that's standing in the corner of the room. And I've often thought, did the problem get bigger or did I just get a little smaller relative to the problem? So now it seems like a bigger issue. The problem itself is still there, it hasn't changed, but my ability to handle the problem has now been diminished because of the fact I've lost time, I've lost resources, I've lost a part of me. And I think about that sometimes as kind of a funny optic when I think about humans and problems or issues. But let's also take a look at reasons for gambling. And a possible predictor for problem gambling, oftentimes research tells us that there's two predictors that we need to be aware of. Number one is age of onset. When does a person first get exposed to gambling and when do they first start with that gambling or gambling-like activity? Oftentimes we see children gambling, and it could be from lottery tickets in the stockings. It could be from innocent $1 bets, seemingly innocent at least, with parents or family members on the sport games, the NFL games on the weekend. You know, it's seemingly innocent, but it normalizes the experience. And age of onset matters to a developing brain and to a developing child's sense of gambling. Number two is the big win. And I put it in quotes, as you can see, because a big win is relative because it doesn't just have to be money. So if you start gambling at an early age, and a big win for a child might be spending time with their parent or their loved one, right? So if you see that as the big win because your parents are so busy, they're always working, there's no time, but you get a chance to spend time with your mom or your dad or your grandparents, and it's fun and it makes you feel good, and it was at a gambling establishment or over a gambling activity, that can be a big win also in the eyes of a child. So we always want to be aware that we're so conditioned to think about gambling as a money issue. It's not. I want to challenge your thinking so that you can always stay aware that gambling is an emotional issue. Gambling can become relationship issues, right? The money is the agent that's often used, that someone often uses to gamble. However, a person with a gambling problem does not have the money problem. Sure, they're out of money, but if you erase all of their debts and you pay off all the bills, right? We wipe the slate clean and now they're allowed to continue. Well, if they didn't deal with the emotional stuff that's going on underneath, they very well could just run those debts way back up and they'll be out of money again. So while they create money problems from the gambling problem is more of an emotional issue that needs to be addressed at a deeper level. In the state of New Jersey, internet gambling was legalized in 2013. That allowed for mobile device, internet, remote gambling activity. From the comfort of your own home, you can wake up in the morning, come down the stairs in your pajamas, log on, and you can be gambling to your heart's content. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It never closes. It's always on, always available. And there's several ways that this impacts a gambler. Dr. Mark Griffiths, who's a renowned researcher, highlighted 10 different areas that internet and mobile device gambling can have an impact on a gambler. And I show you them here, you know, ranging from accessibility. And for the sake of time, because we only have the hour today, I did not go into more detail on all 10. In other workshops that we deliver around the state and around the country, we dive deeper into each of these 10, but that would mean that we have to spend 2 or 3 hours today covering all of the topics. So quickly, we understand that internet and mobile device gambling does provide accessibility. It is affordable, it's easy, it's cheap. You don't have to worry about putting gas in your car and driving down. It's anonymous. No one will see you. You can do it from the comfort of your living room. I remember before COVID, I was sitting at a Starbucks up in northern New Jersey, and there was a gentleman to my right, and I was working at the table. He was to the right on his phone, and he was playing poker on his phone. And he happened to see I had a business card between us. And I didn't put it out there for any reason other than I just don't like sitting with things in my pocket. It bothers me. So I take things out and I put them on a table, including my keys and my wallet. So I don't know why I do that, but that's what I used to do. So I had the card and he looked over and glanced at the card and he looks at me and I look at him and he says, "I don't have a gambling problem." And I said, "That's great. I didn't say you did." You know, he thought I was putting my card out there because I was trying to tell him something. And he started going into about a 3 to 5 minute explanation about why he likes to gamble on his phone and why he goes to this particular Starbucks and how much money he spends. And I didn't say anything. But it's just so funny when you meet people who are so quick to defend. They feel as if you're judging them, but you're not. They just feel as if they need to defend their actions. So I listened to them and I said, "Great." And the only question I asked him, is it a legal site that you're playing on that's regulated through the state of New Jersey, or is it one of those offshore illegal sites? He goes, "Oh no." He goes, I would never play on those illegal sites. He goes, "I used to do that and I won money. They didn't pay me." He goes, "I that was it. I wasn't doing that anymore." I said, "Okay, good. You got to be safe." So that was the end of the conversation, but it was a little humorous. Other reasons that people use internet gambling is to escape. Right? It's an easy way to escape. It's an easy way to forget about your life for a while. It's a safe place that people will find. And people don't just find a safe place to escape gambling online. You can also check Facebook. You can be on Instagram. You can be on social media. You can play video games. You can play social casino games. There's so many ways that we can distract ourselves. There's too many. Thousands of ways, thousands of apps, thousands of opportunities to take us out of any smallest amount of pain that we might be going through on a particular day. It's always easier to escape our own problems or focus on someone else's than it is to deal with the mud in our life. And internet gambling is just one of the many that some people choose, right? You can become immersed in it. You dissociate from your surroundings. It makes you feel as if you're just free, right? I can take more chances when I gamble online. That's a concern. People tend to open up more quickly online. They also tend to gamble more online, both in terms of time, length of time, quantity of money, and also size of bet, right? So length of time over hours, the amount of money spent over hours, but also on each hand or on each round, they tend to wager a bit more. Electronic money doesn't feel like real money at times. When you can't physically touch or hold actual physical currency, some people will start to develop a problem. They may not really realize how much money they've spent over the course of time, and that can become concerning. As we talk about internet gambling, we also have to talk about the progression. Okay. So, what we started to see in New Jersey and around the country about 5 years ago was this conversation and these commercials around fantasy sports, right? DraftKings and FanDuel, as you can see in the bottom left, those were the first two to the market. And we went through a stretch that you couldn't go more than a few minutes, it seemed, without hearing a commercial for fantasy sports contests, whether it was fantasy football or baseball or hockey or basketball, whatever it might be. And it was not deemed to be a form of gambling. It was deemed to be based upon someone's skill on how they pick their players, and therefore it was not considered gambling. I'll leave the rest of the opinions out of this, but what we've known and what our helpline has shown over time is that we still have people, who call when they have problematic fantasy sports use. They lose money on these websites and they can't pay their bills. That's a problem. Technically not gambling, but still creating harm through involvement. That's a problem, right? And we also have situations where people are in recovery from gambling or substance use disorder, and they've turned to fantasy sports contests as just another way to escape. And it can slowly start to create problems or send them back to their original drug of choice. So we have to be careful about the connected behaviors. In order to explain fantasy sports a little better, I have this little short video to break things up a little bit so I can look at the chat. Feel free to use the chat, as I mentioned, and take a look at this little video. So I always cut off at the end there because that's a promotion for a website, and we're not promoting any fantasy sports websites. But I like the concept where it provides you just kind of that overview. Type in the chat. Let me know what you think about that. It might raise a question or two. Did anyone notice that you can enter some of these contests for as little as 25 cents? Can you see someone saying 25 cents? Oh, I'll enter 4 of them for $1. What's my harm? What's my risk? Let me just pick some different players. For $1, I have a chance to win, $10,000, $5,000 entering for 25 cents. Or I can enter some of these contests for $10 in hopes of winning $1 million. That's fantastic, right? And that's some of the areas of concern. And that was deemed not to be gambling because the determination of who wins was primarily based upon, this is how it was viewed. This is not my opinion. This was the argument, was based upon how well you pick the players and how well you construct the lineup and the team to score those points. What it failed to realize is that there's still risk involved, right? You can do all the research you want, but you can't predict an injury on the field. You can't predict the way a ball bounces. You can't predict certain things. I think about the investment world when I talk about this, because there's a line in the investment world. If you've ever done any investing, there's one tagline that's always mentioned. Past performance is not indicative of future results. And that's the same thing for the sports bettor, for the fantasy sports player, for anyone who tries to think that their skill or their knowledge can influence and give them an added advantage. Past performance is not indicative of future results. And I think about that when we talk about these topics. We're right now working with Seton Hall University and the Stillman School of Business to do a survey and study in the state of New Jersey that will be completed in the spring. And this is a prevalence study. And we are working with students and grad assistants to understand gambling amongst 18 to 25-year-olds around the state of New Jersey. And we're really excited about this opportunity. And so far, they're doing some wonderful work. When we received back the initial qualitative data, and which I can share, 25 students were interviewed on the college campus asking for thoughts and perceptions and qualitative type information. And it was amazing as I was reviewing the data, how many students age 18 to 25 do not see sports gambling as gambling. They see it, they described it in these various ways. Easy money, fast way to make money, a good time with friends, a chance for me to show off, helps me pay my bills. Not one time did someone mention gambling or potential problem. It was all positive. It was all based upon their skill or their ability to make easy, fast money and to pay bills. That starts to highlight a problem and a concern that we have when we talk about marketing and awareness, especially to our younger people. And that's something as an agency that we need to address, and we will be addressing as we move through the months and the years to come. So fantasy sports contests, basically I showed you the video there. These were traditionally done as season-long contests where you would pick a team in September, and then by the time you get to the end of the football season or baseball season, you still have your team and maybe you've made some trades, but it was looked at as a season-long commitment. For the next 3 to 5 months or 6 months, you're going to be playing in this contest against your friends, against your peers, and it's fun, great. What changed, though, with technology was the advent of daily fantasy sports contests. Same concept, picking players, hoping to score points. The difference is you draft a new team every day or every week if it's the NFL. So, for instance, NBA basketball returned, I think it was Wednesday or last night. I think it was Wednesday. There was a couple of games. So DraftKings, FanDuel, the fantasy sports sites, they all have the ability where you can enter these daily contests. And guess what? The next day comes, you draft another team if you want to play. So that all involves research. And that's where we start seeing people who struggle with sports betting or with gambling can also find an outlet in fantasy sports because of the preoccupation. Now someone's spending a lot of time researching statistics, looking at past performance, trying to figure out what the matchup looks like for tonight. It's a very similar style of handicapping that goes into sports betting. So we don't want to minimize, if you have a client that you're seeing as a clinician, or if you have someone in your life and they say, oh, I just play fantasy sports, it's not real, it's just fun. Don't minimize that. Because for some people, that can become a trigger or that can lead to prolonged use, increased use, transition to sports betting. If they're in recovery from drugs and alcohol, they can be using daily fantasy sports as an outlet or an escape or an addiction switch. So we have to be very, very careful. Daily fantasy sports normalizes the spending of money. It reinforces, it's that fast outcome. And here we are again with that rapid reinforcement. Instead of waiting several weeks or months to determine who wins your league in a fantasy sports contest, you're now finding out the winner every day, every night, within 3 hours. So it's that rapid reinforcement that we have to be aware of. There was a study done in New Jersey in 2018, and they were analyzing problem gambling, gambling addiction, and mental health problems amongst people who play daily fantasy sports contests. And they interviewed over 3,600 New Jersey residents age 18 and above. And what they tended to find was that most predictive of those who played daily fantasy sports contests also tended to have a higher number of gambling activities. They tended to do so with increased frequency. They tended to be males, tended to have higher reports of suicidal ideation, and they also tended to be single. So here we are, single males who also gamble with increasing frequency. This is concerning. We have to recognize a connection. We don't have to recognize cause effect. We don't have to say, we run into that sometimes where we try to identify what's the cause and the effect. And sure, sometimes that is important, but we also have to recognize the connected behaviors because one can lead to the other or vice versa. Some people will gamble because they are depressed. Other people are depressed, and so they gamble, right? So the depression leads to increased gambling, or the gambling is what made them depressed. We don't know, the chicken or the egg, which came first, but we know there's a connection between gambling and depression. We know there's a connection between gambling and alcohol use disorder, between nicotine dependency. Almost 60% of people with a gambling problem also struggle with alcohol use and or nicotine dependency. There's a connection. Number 2 emerging trend as we move through here. And let me just take a moment to pause. Let me check the chat. Harry, good point. At times we're glorifying the reward and not addressing the risk. And I think that applies. I think about that comment, and I can't tell, that may have been made during the video of the fantasy sports. You can see how your team is doing real time. And that's powerful when you can see real time results. You can be reinforced. Your behavior is being reinforced real time. That's powerful. And that's something that's an area of concern. When I can see if I'm winning money in that moment or if I'm losing money in that moment, and based on how my players score their points, I can see my score move relative to everyone else's. And if I'm in the money, if you will, that makes me feel really, really good. Let me just get over to the Rodrigo. Good to see you here today. Thank you for your question. Let me get this here at this natural stopping point before we transition to esports. Rodrigo has looks like a comment and a question. In gambling, especially with slot machines, intermittent winnings would be an example of conditioning and classical conditioning. It's intermittent reinforcement, right? And so every so often, someone is conditioned to know that they are going to win something of value. And what we tend to find in your second point, can a person who is a sports fanatic and presently in recovering from gambling ever be able to watch sports, or would that be a huge trigger for them? That's a great question. That's an individualized answer. I have known and spoken with and interacted with personally several people in recovery from sports gambling, some of whom never watched sports another day in their life, some of whom were able to let some time pass, and as they moved along their journey of recovery, they were able to slowly integrate it back into their life, and not in the way, though, that they ever watched sports before. I think about a sports gambler who would bet on every game and watch every game all the time, but then they just become maybe just a fan of one team, right? So now you're just a fan of your local team. You consume sports in a healthy manner. Doing things in a healthy behavioral way, in a healthy manner where it's not creating problems in other areas of your life. But that's an individualized decision, as oftentimes it often is. But it's a great point. Some people can never go back to watching sports because they realize the only reason they loved watching sports was because they loved to gamble on it. And once they've stopped gambling, they don't have a desire to watch the sports anymore. So a really interesting question. Thank you for bringing that up. Let's get into the next type of sports, esports. Some of you might be saying, what the heck are esports? Some of you even might be saying, what are those things with people in them? Those are called arenas. That's where people used to go to watch things in person. And we're slowly getting back there. And I always like to have a little fun and laugh a little bit. See, if I'm in a room full of people and we're interacting with each other, we might have had a couple of chuckles there. So you could go to an arena and you can go watch your favorite video game players compete against each other. In the lower right, that's a team. I'm not sure which one they're with. It's 6 players, and they're playing a video game. Let's call it Counter-Strike, or maybe they're playing League of Legends, and they're going up against another team. And there's people that would crowd arenas, and on these big screens, you could watch and cheer on your favorite video game sports team. Sounds crazy? Well, it's not, because esports is a booming business. It's global. The Olympics are considering adding esports as an Olympic medal event. We know that colleges offer scholarships. So if a college offers a scholarship, you better be practicing and playing at an early age in order to earn that full ride. There have been a number of students in New Jersey who have gone on to college on full esports scholarships. There was a young man a couple of years ago out of Hasbrook Heights High School who got a full ride to Stanford University for esports. And I asked him about, how do you train? Is it really just playing all the time? Is that, because I know as an athlete, when I played baseball, I trained a lot, but I didn't play all the time. I had to let my body heal. I had to do certain things to make sure that I could perform at a high level the next day. And he said it's the same thing for professional video gamers. They even have personal trainers that you can hire that specialize in training esports athletes. And they'll put a focus on nutrition. They'll put a focus on sleep and rest, non-screen time. So reading books, interacting with family. They put a focus on exercise programs, getting physical activity, working the muscles, getting outside and getting fresh air. So there's a lot that goes into it. Stretching is a big factor because the thumbs and the hands can start to develop problems and issues. So this is a big market. This is a huge market. And during COVID, it really exploded. We've seen more people gaming, either professionally or socially. We've seen more people consuming more, watching more people play video games. It's been such a rise and such a phenomenon. It's global. It's a new form of entertainment, and it's all over. Even colleges. The Caldwell College in northern New Jersey received a $1 million grant to redo one of their maybe rundown facilities that they had and make it into an esports lab where people could go and play video games and the team could compete. That was pre-COVID, so I don't know the status of that now or if that was on hold, but there's been a big push on college campuses and then in the gambling world as well, because there have been a number of casinos that would try to draw esports events to their facility, to their location, so they could host the event. And now you're drawing in today's gamer could become tomorrow's gambler. And so you're seeing the progression here when you introduce someone at an early age to an experience and they have a positive outcome or a positive experience, the big win early, doesn't have to be money. They can now come back as a loyal member and visit your establishment once they turn 21 and can legally gamble. So you're kind of reaching out and reaching back at an earlier age. Spectating esports is a big business. EA Sports is one of the large makers of video games, and they had a 3-year plan. And in going back to fiscal year 17, through fiscal year 19, you can see by fiscal year 19, they wanted to have large scale spectating of virtual sport events. They wanted to make money off this. They wanted to have players competing and spectating and sharing with friends. They exceeded this. They blew through these expectations. EA Sports is the maker of the most popular sports title in the world, which is the Madden series, which is a football game. And there are tournaments and prizes, and people watch and play all around the world all year long. During COVID, going back to April of last year, live streaming had almost 100% year-over-year growth. What does that mean? What does live streaming mean? I'm throwing a lot of terminology out here. Essentially what it means is that you might have a young person in your household who gets done with school and they jump on a website like Twitch or YouTube gaming or Facebook gaming, and they're watching other people play games. That's what it is. They're watching other people live stream how they play a game. And then as you're watching that individual, you can choose to become a fan and you can throw them some credits, you can throw them some real money. It's a business. One of the more popular live streamers is a gamer called Ninja, and he was making $500,000 a month at one point, $6 million a year just to play video games. And it's the way the person, so it's their personality, their charisma, it's how they play the game. We don't know why people become famous sometimes. We don't know how some of the YouTubers become famous. They just do. They just have this appeal, this attraction. It's outside my range of expertise. It doesn't appeal to me. It's not my demographic. But you're starting to see 18 to 25, 18 to 31, and even younger in some areas that this appeals to. Okay. Esports revenue growth is huge. And here's what I'll say. It's new, it's growing, it generates a lot of revenue, and it's largely unregulated. Where the regulation comes into play from our perspective, are you able to gamble on these contests? That's where it becomes a concern. In the state of New Jersey, I know there's been discussion about how should we view esports, how are professional video gaming tournaments viewed, because some of the participants in these contests are underage. They're under the age of 18. So do you allow gambling on these? Should it fall under sports betting legislation? There might be some of you from other states that are on here. I don't know what the answer is, right? I'm just letting you know, highlighting what some of the concerns or the issues are from various regulatory agencies from around the country. But what's the impact? It's fine. We can talk about revenue. We can talk about the business model. We can talk about the growth and recognize it. But more importantly, we always want to go back. What's the impact on today's youth? Gaming, generally speaking, is free to play, or it has a freemium component. Freemium means that it can start out as being free, but then you get these little annoying pop-up ads that say, oh, for 99 cents, we're going to give you 3 more lives. Or for 99 cents, you can play for another hour. Okay, so that's the concept of freemium. It's free, but there's a premium component that you attach with it, hence freemium. It also allows youth a temporary escape. But let's not forget that gaming is more than playing games today. When you have young people on their Xbox or on their PlayStation, especially during the height of the pandemic, they were not able to physically interact with each other. So I had a number of parents who said, my kid is playing too long, too much. They're not tending to their homework. Their attitude stinks, whatever it was. I'm taking their gaming away. I said, okay. I said, just also understand that now you're also taking away their social connection. So not only are you taking away the game, you're taking away their ability to socially connect with their friends, and now you are further isolating them. And then that would open up a dialogue, right? Because sometimes there are unintended consequences of our actions. So we have to understand that gaming is not just about the game today. It's about social connection. It's about, for some kids, it gives them some sort of purpose and meaning. It does, unfortunately, provide this dopamine overload, and it's difficult to abandon a behavior when it makes you feel good all the time. So kids organically are going to choose to go back to gaming oftentimes than perhaps do something else that used to give them a lower level of dopamine. If gaming gives me 10 units of dopamine, just picking a measurement, and reading a book gives me 2, which one would you choose, right? I know I would choose the one that gives me more dopamine if I want to feel good, okay? So we have to understand. And then the last point here, gaming is a safe place. It's a safe place to play. It's a safe place to experiment. It's a safe place to fail. We were out speaking to a group of peer leaders out in the Pittsburgh area a couple of years ago, and these students, when I asked the question, why do you game? Why do you like gaming? What is it about gaming that just excites you? The number one answer from all of the round tables, there were 10 students at each of 15 round tables. The most frequently occurring answer was a safe place. Because after a hard day at school, or after a fight with their friend, or disagreements with their parents, whatever it was, gaming was that thing that they could escape to. That was the second choice, but primarily it was safe. They felt comfortable and safe in that space. That's interesting. It's a safe space. Kids need a safe space. We need a safe space. As adults, we all deserve it. We're all entitled to that. What's the connection, though, with gaming and gambling? As we move through, we can understand there's a concern about the time component that's spent, the content. Oftentimes, parents will talk about the simulated drug use, the violence in video games as a reason for. Unfortunately, when we saw a lot of mass school shootings, a number of parents were saying that video games were the sole cause of that. And while there can be an element in video games that could be one of the elements, it's never the sole cause that someone performs that action. Yes, we've spoken. I've had the privilege of listening to a panelist at a national conference talk about how his friend was a movie theater shooter out in Aurora, Colorado years ago. And his friend played violent video games, but his friend also had gone through death of family, trauma, abuse, right? There's oftentimes multiple things going on that we don't know about. It's never just the video game. But parents, while they highlight drug use and violence, I don't hear them talk about simulated gambling, because simulated gambling is in video games. Not just simulated gambling, but also actual gambling mechanics. And now those are in the form of what's called loot boxes. Loot boxes, some of you may have heard me talk about this on another webinar, is essentially a random reward mechanism. It's basically a little box. Think of it like a slot machine. You pay some money to have an opportunity to win something of value, right? You're risking something of value, you're paying for it. You open up this box and it contains some digital items. And the digital item might be something for your character. Maybe it makes them look really cool or very intimidating. Maybe it's a really cool skin for a person's weapon. It makes it look cooler, right? But it doesn't have any real tangible value. So you're paying in order to hope of win something of value. That's a loot box. Well, I think that sounds very similar to a slot machine, risking something of value in hopes of winning something of value, right? There's consideration, there's chance, and there's a prize in all three elements. So loot boxes are not regulated around the United States. However, around the world, they're coming under more scrutiny. There are a number of countries around the globe, including the UK, including Belgium, including China, where they are now forcing restrictions on loot box purchasing. They're requiring messaging around loot box. And in some instances, in some jurisdictions, they are now being regulated under the Gambling Commission of certain countries. So this is something to keep an eye on. If there's a person in your life who's spending a lot of money on video games, it can become concerning. Again, not a form of gambling per se, but it's the mechanics and the behaviors that we need to address, okay? So we highlighted the potential risks of gaming. I want to point you specifically to bullet number 4. Always think in simple terms. The brain develops the gas pedal faster than the braking system. So when we have a young person who wants to go, 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 right? Remember the beginning, the decision-making piece, that prefrontal is still developing? They want to go, go, go. Our job is to say, whoa, 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 slow down. We're the braking system. Parents, grandparents, clinicians, teachers, educators, whoever it might be, we're the braking system for our folks who want to go too fast, okay? Take a look at the last bullet point on this slide, the problematic cognitions with gaming, because gaming can allow a number of things, and this PowerPoint will be available for anyone who wants it. And again, as I mentioned at the start, we are recording this. This workshop will be available on demand on our website, 800gambler.org, next week. The goal of companies producing video games is to identify, harvest, and mine the motivation of gamers while administering the digital dopamine drip that they crave. That phrase, digital dopamine drip, that's a good one to kind of take away and think about and maybe use as you come across people who feel the same way. As we go to the last session, last part of today, let's talk about sports betting in the state of New Jersey and emerging trends. This has been a tremendous area of growth. There is so much going on in the world of sports betting, not just in the state of New Jersey, but around the country. We now have, as of February 1st, 21 states offering some form of legalized sports betting, and then 15 of those are offering some form of remote or online virtual way to gamble on sports. New Jersey or Nevada are neck and neck. In the month of December last year, New Jersey had just under $1 billion of handle in sports betting monies. What is handle? Handle is the pure number of dollars that are wagered on sports. That's all it is. Don't confuse it with revenue. Don't confuse it with anything else. Handle is how much money is being spent and wagered by gamblers on sports betting. Let me take you to this chart. This is the chart that the agency, that the Council on Compulsive Gambling, has been putting together since the start of sports betting being legalized in July of 2018. It was legalized in June of 2018, in the midpoint of the month. So we started tracking from July 1 to get a full month, and then through January 31st of 21. What you see here in blue is the handle. That's how much money was wagered in the state of New Jersey. And you can see cyclically it's going up over time, right? Upward sloping to the right. The orange represents the percentage of people calling our 800 Gambler helpline who indicate that sports gambling is the primary reason for the call. I'm going to say that again. These are the percentage of people who call our 800 Gambler helpline indicating that the sports betting was the main reason for their call. If you note, you can almost see somewhat of a relationship between handle and percentage of people calling. Look at January. We had almost 30% of our helpline calls were for sports gambling related. Since COVID, you can see you can see the March, April, May, June, and even July numbers of last year, because sports came to a grinding halt. Now, people were still gambling. There was still Belarusian soccer. There was ping pong, table tennis in Russia. There was Korean baseball. The KBO was going on. So there were still ways that people were gambling. But you can see since sports has returned, the percentage of people experiencing gambling-related harms from sports betting, that doesn't even cover the internet piece. When you layer in people who are playing online casino and internet gambling, that's over 50% of our helpline calls are for sports betting or internet gambling. We have an issue that we need to address. A Rutgers study done a few years ago, 2018, I believe it was on the prevalence of internet gambling around the state of New Jersey. And at one point, there was one of their studies that showed New Jersey has a 6.3% disordered gambling rate. That's 3 times the national average. The national average is estimated to be around 2%, 2 to 2.1. New Jersey is 6.3. Accessibility, availability, speed and repetition, rapid reinforcement, gambling expansion. We need to be asking questions. We need to be asking people about their gambling activity. We understand that a majority of people do not experience gambling-related harms, but I will challenge that by saying along a continuum, and I think it's growing, a larger percentage of people are starting to realize, hey, this thing can become a problem real fast because it feels good and it's a normal activity. But when you start going back to it and it becomes a pattern in your life, it becomes a habit, and now it becomes something that you have to do and you can't live without, that's when we're starting to walk on that slippery slope. And sports betting has 2 characteristics in particular that we have to be careful of. One is called in-play sports betting, and the other is the early cash out feature. In-play sports betting is just what it sounds like. So imagine the previous way of sports betting before technology really came about. You'd bet the Giants to beat the Eagles because I'm a Giants fan and the Giants have to beat the Eagles someday. I'm tired of the Eagles always winning, okay? But the Giants have to beat the Eagles. So I bet that the Giants are going to beat the Eagles. I bet $100 at the start of the game, and I have to wait 3 hours only to find out that once again, unfortunately, the Eagles have won. And so now I lost my $100. But I had to wait 3 hours, right? Or if we were playing the Patriots in a Super Bowl, I would know we're going to win. So I would bet the $500 and I would wait for us to beat the Patriots in the Super Bowl to win my money. In either case, I had to wait for the outcome to be finished. Okay. I hope we're having another good laugh at that one. With in-play sports betting, I don't have to wait. I can bet the start of a game, and after the first quarter, I can bet the next quarter. I can bet the next play. I can go over and be betting a baseball game and bet what the next pitch is going to be. I can bet a soccer match and I can bet if there's going to be a goal in the next 90 seconds or not. In-play sports betting allows me to make multiple bets in a game, as many as I want. Oftentimes there will be a size restriction on the amount of money. However, it allows multiple bets. And this is a concern because when you have a large number of bets throughout the game, instead of just one, you are now increasing your frequency, rapid reinforcement. It can lead to the acquisition of a problem. It can it can maintain a problem. It can provide a false sense of an illusion of control because the gambler thinks that they have a better idea of what will happen because they're really watching the game. So this can become very harmful for that rapid reinforcement. A person is getting conditioned on a more rapidly occurring basis. Sometimes time is a protective factor, right? Waiting 3 hours for an outcome, time is the built-in protective factor. That is now gone. So there's another organic protective factor that has been removed, right? When we talk about people who gamble in an online casino format, there's no concept of switching decks of cards or a new player buying in, nothing that slows the pace of the game down. When you're online, the game just continues to go. You can play blackjack every 3 to 5 seconds. You can just keep playing and playing and playing and playing. You never overdose, right? You never pass out. You might fall asleep, but then you wake up, you can keep playing. When you play brick and mortar, though, you have those organic stopping points where there's a new dealer. They have to count out the chips. A new player buys in. They have to get a new shoe or a new deck of cards. That slows the pace down organically. We have to be careful with this rapid reinforcement. Illusion of control in in-play sports betting. The gambler can dictate the speed, the amount, the volume, and that can maintain and contribute to a gambling problem, right? It's that high-speed continuous reinforcement. For those in the substance world, I often think of it as administering it through the vein instead of taking a pill and waiting for it to dissolve through the system. It hits me faster this way. And so rapid reinforcement, internet gambling will hit somebody faster and can create problematic use in a faster method than playing slower forms of gambling. The other part of this, before we wrap up today, is the early cash out feature. So what happens if I bet those Giants and they're losing in the first quarter against the Eagles? I bet $100, right? So I now have the option to close out my bet. I can actually, the sports book that I placed the bet with will offer me maybe $70, right? So if I close out the bet right now, they will give me $70 to close out my bet. So now my opportunity cost is that $30, right? Well, I have to weigh that. Do I want to let the bet continue to go and see what the outcome is? Because then I can either win more money, but if the Giants lose, then I lose my entire bet. Or do I take this offer and say, let me close out the bet and figure out where I can put the money somewhere else? Oftentimes, a gambler is not leaving it in their account. The gambler is putting it back and betting on something else. And the sports books know that. That's why cash out, a lot of people take advantage of cash out because they understand that if the game doesn't start out the way they want, they can close out their bet and put it somewhere else. But does that change the thinking from gambling to investing? And this is the concern. You know, we're starting to talk more about day trading and gambling and the connections and the connected behaviors. And we know the stock market with Robinhood and GameStop. I don't know what GameStop's doing today, but it could be another roller coaster ride if it's even trading right now. We don't even know. So we're starting to look at these connected behaviors. Early cash out allows you to kind of close out that bet early. So now, am I really gambling or am I just really good at skillful money management? It makes me understand more why college students on the Seton Hall study did not view sports betting as gambling. They see it as a way to make money. There's a number of these students. These students are all gambling in an online fashion. They all have utilized the early cash out feature. Those were some of the other findings. So they think of it as a way for money management and not a way of gambling. The marketing matters. And early cash out can best be understood by Howie Mandel, because essentially what's happening is the banker, who is a sports book, is giving you an offer. Do you choose to cash that out now? Or do you want to continue pressing on in hopes of getting that bigger prize? So as we move through here, let's take a quick look at something I want to highlight before I go to the question. I've alluded to the fact today about the shortening reward schedule, about rapid reinforcement, but let's take a look at 5 areas where we can clearly see that. We talked about fantasy sports contests used to be season long. Well, that was the delay of gratification. Now the immediate gratification is the daily fantasy, right? So that's the substitution there. Traditional sports betting has now been replaced in some way with in-play sports wagering. From a lottery perspective, it used to be once a day, right? Or weekly lottery. Now it's instant win, scratch off, everything instantaneous. Brick and mortar casino, where there's that delay in between hands. Now it's internet casino. Video games. Some people would have to play video games for a long time to get to finish the game or feel really good. Now you can buy loot boxes. You can progress faster through the game. You can buy your way through the game. And the one that's not listed here, investing, long-term investing, buy and hold stocks is now being replaced with day trading. We're seeing more people doing that immediate gratification. So what do we do as we stop sharing here? In the state of New Jersey, we have the 800 Gambler helpline that provides support and resources 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for the loved one and for the problem gambler. You pick up the phone, you call if you or someone you know has a gambling problem, and we'll walk you through resources that are available. What we do know is that in-person meetings are still sporadic. There are some in-person Gamblers Anonymous meetings and other meetings going on around the state. One resource that we've started using as an agency is a website called gamblersinrecovery.com. That is a really helpful tool that will list all virtual meetings that are going on around the country. Last week, I was in a meeting in Ireland. I just clicked the Zoom meeting link, I put in a password, and boom, I was in a meeting with other people, right? There's meetings all around the country that are accessible. Gamblersinrecovery.com. If someone's on here that has a family member or a loved one struggling with a gaming addiction, then you can reach out to gamequitters.com. That's Cam Adair. Cam Adair does a great job, and there's a lot of resources on that website to figure out if you're struggling with a video game addiction, right? Our website, 800gambler.org, has a number of resources and information for the loved one or for the family member who struggles with gambling addiction. It's Problem Gambling Awareness Month. That's why we're having this conversation. I'm going to jump into the chat now. We have about a moment or two left. So I want to just go through and eyeball the chat to make sure that we have questions. Steve Ross, good that you're here today. Thank you for sharing. Steve highlights that there are actually boot camps where gamers can go live in a house that's set up so that they can practice and learn how to play. That also reminds me, on the other spectrum, residential treatment programs. There is one in Washington State called Restart Life. It's Restart. There's also one in Northern California, but I do not know the name of it. So internet gaming disorder or video game addiction, those terms are sometimes used interchangeably. It's not recognized by the DSM, so there's no diagnostic code in the United States. However, the World Health Organization has recognized it in the 11th revision of the International Classification of Diseases, the ICD-11, as a disorder. So we tend to see that things will be moving east to west, and I could see in the next few years us having a diagnostic code for gaming disorder. We see a lot of adolescents, Lenny, good point, are doing this during virtual learning. A lot of schools have kids sign in the morning to game to get their schoolwork for the day, and then they get their work done, and then they're just on the Xbox and the PlayStation for the rest of the day. So we have to be very aware as parents, as grandparents, as friends, as to what activities are our children doing. I want to go over, thank you for sharing, Richard. Thank you for putting in the website on the chat. I do appreciate that, for sharing that. And I think, let me see, I have one question left, which I'll address here. When a client wants to stop sports betting, this is a question from Cheryl. He wants to sign out of sports betting or internet activity. Oh, self-exclusion. This question is talking about how does someone stop. In the state of New Jersey, there is something called voluntary self-exclusion, which allows a gambler to block themselves voluntarily from all forms of gambling, either in person or online. For a period, if you're doing it remotely, you can select 1 or 5 year period. If you want to block yourself for your lifetime, you have to go down to one of the offices that are highlighted on the Division of Gaming Enforcement's website, and you have to go in person to sign up for lifetime self-exclusion. I just verified that information last week, because at one point you were able to sign up for lifetime self-exclusion online. There was a change to that somewhere over the last 2 to 3 years, where if you sign up for lifetime, you need to do it in person. So take a look at the Division of Gaming Enforcement's website. If you were to do a Google search and type in self-exclusion New Jersey, it'll pop right up. And then if you have a gambler who's playing illegally on the illegal sites, right? Not the legalized sites, but the illegal sites, there are several software companies, Gamban is one. BetBlocker is one, where you can pay a small fee and you can block someone from their gambling activity, both the legal and the illegal sites. And lastly, in the state of New Jersey, we are fortunate that we have a grant to fund for the treatment of gambling disorder for both the problem gambler and the loved one. We have a network of treatment providers scattered throughout the state that are seeing people in person, virtually, or both. That information is on our website. So if you or someone you know has a problem and needs help and wants some one-on-one clinical work, visit our website or feel free to reach out. We'll put you in touch with an individual. I want to thank everyone for today for being here. I know we went over by a couple of minutes. I hope you enjoyed it. And we look forward to seeing you again next week, where our own Luis Del Orbe will be presenting on how parents can kind of help navigate this process, some parental techniques, how to address risk-taking and decision-making in youth, and how it applies to gambling and gaming. Thank you all. Hope you have a great weekend. Don't forget to move your clocks forward tomorrow night into Sunday, 1 hour, and looking forward to warmer days. Thanks again. Have a great day.